In this video, we're going to look at creating a master material for use in our scenes. This is going to allow us to create a material that we can use over and over again for different props, different tileable materials, all sorts of things, and it allows us to instance from that master material instances of this. This is specifically useful if you're working in big teams. Maybe you've got some juniors that you don't want them messing around with their actual materials themselves, and you can create like kind of a nice workflow to incorporate those members of the team into it. So it's definitely something that you could look at doing for the game dev project in the next semesters, not in the next semester. So yeah, so let's get started on this. So what we're going to do is, let's not move that, is we're going to create a master tileable material. So the first thing is, this is what mine looks like. And it allows me to change these based off different materials, different textures that I'm using basically. And then we also use the material function that we made inside of here to allow us to build this. Okay, so let's get started on that. So I'm going to right click, create a new material. I'm going to call this master material. I'm going to double click on it. I'm just going to drag that off and bring it back. So the first thing we're going to do is create the color area. So I'm going to let me see if this works. No. So I'm going to right click and look for a 3 vector constant, and I'm going to convert this to a parameter and call this tint. And then what I'm going to do is look for a param 2D, and I'm going to call this albedo. And with this, I'm going to create a multiply. So hold M, left click, I'm going to drag it all in, and then drag that to the base color. And then I'm just going to press C to comment this and call this color. Okay, change the color of it. And there we go, there's our first thingy. Now for this example, I'm just going to go in here and type it brick and look for brick beveled. Now at the moment, this is not going to show up with anything, so we do need to change this to white. Click OK. And now you can see the texture. Basically, if it was black, it wouldn't thingy. And with this as well, we can change the tint to this as well. But for now, we're just going to leave it white so that we can see the actual albedo itself. Now the next thing we're going to make is an emissive control. So again, I'm just going to copy this up from up here, and then I'm going to call this emissive tint, and then I'm going to add that to a multiplier. So I'm going to just drag off, look for multiply, and then I'm going to drag off again, multiply, and then I'm going to put an emissive power in here. So this is so if you hold S and left click, you can add a scalable parameter, which is a default value of 0. So this is between 0 and 1, on and off. And I'm going to call this emissive power. I'm going to just drag that into here, and then going to drag that into the emissive. Now we're going to use this color and multiply it with an alpha, which is going to sit in our PSM. So we leave that empty for the time being. I'm just going to comment and call this emissive, and yeah, and then I'm just going to change the color so it's a different color. So that's our two first main sections. So the next one is going to be a roughness. Now on this is going to be, basically we're going to have a roughness min value. So again, this is a scalar thingy. So S on the keyboard, hold S and then click in here, and I'm just going to call this the roughness min. And then if I just delete those a minute, let's start that again, and then I'm going to call this roughness max. Okay, right, and then I'm going to just create another scalar and call this roughness control. And then I'm going to create a lerp, so hold L, and I'm going to alert these two values together, with this being the control. So I'm just going to put -1 on this and 1 on that. We can leave that as default. And then what I'm going to do is add. Now, slight issue, that's in the wrong thing. So I'm going to control left click to delete it, and then add it to here. And then what I'm going to do is clamp these values together between 0 and 1. And then add this to the roughness. I'm going to comment it and call this roughness. I'm going to change the color of it. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add the PSM. So pack specular map. So I'm going to go for 2D. I'm going to call this PSM. Now, if I look at my export, you'll notice that in the green channel is the roughness. The red channel would be metallic. Blue would be AO. And alpha is going to be the emissive, so we need to make sure that we tag these in the right one. So the green is going to go into, there we go, I couldn't find that then, into the add here. The alpha of this is going to go into the multiply, and the AO is just going to drop into the ambient occlusion like so, and the red is going to drop into the metallic like that. Now we're pretty much clear, but the issue with when you're working with tileable textures is that you kind of want them to tile, and you want to be able to do that in the engine itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our material function that we made, and we're going to call it, and we're going to say sample, and then click UVs. Now it's going to give us an error, and we're not going to be able to save it properly at the moment, so we need to create some scalar, we need to create some one vector scalar vectors here to allow us to turn these and edit these things. So I'm going to create, okay, so U, V, X, Y, and there we go. Right, so with that in mind now, we want to change the default values of these, because if we don't, then we're going to have a slight issue. So I'm going to put this as, I'm going to put this as default value of 1, and that should then, so if I was to say change the density to say 5, you'll notice that it starts to tile nothing because it's not attached, it's only attached to the PSM. So we do need to attach this to other parts of the thing, so click UVs, and that's fine for the time being. Now we're going to create a normal, so we're going to create a parameter again, 2D, and call this normal map, and then we're going to go do another one, so 2D, call this detail. Now what this is going to be is it's going to allow us to add like a custom microsurface detail map on top of the normal map. So to begin with, what we need to do is we need to put a scalar parameter in here and call this normal flat, and then off this we need to look for a flatten normal, which is a material function, which is part of the engine. And then to blend these together, we need also a blend angle correct normals. And that just allows us to blend it and it looks properly from all angles. So when I thingy, this thing now can go into the normal. And I'm just going to change this because you can see now it looks a bit weird and funky because we're not using that. So I'm just going to look for a normal map that I made, which is just plain. There's nothing in it. But I did attach that to the wrong one. So let's have a look for brick. There we go. No. And let's go and turn this and put a plain one on, which if I could spell, that would be great. There we go. And then what we're going to do is, because at the moment you can see the tiling is not correct because we haven't plugged this in yet. So I'm just going to plug this into the UVs here, and there we go. So there we've got it's nice and tileable, it's working, and it's using our material function as well. So I'm just going to comment this and call this tileable. I'm going to change the color on it to say yellow. I'm just going to turn this into comment as well and call this normal, change this to a blue. Now we do want to tile this separately, so again I'm just going to go material function and I'm going to call the scalable example, and then I'm just going to make these again. I'm just going to name these U, V, X, Y, and I'm going to call them separately. So I'm going to cut normal U, flip that around, normal V, because if they're the same name as the other ones, that's not going to work. X, Y, normal density. And that's why it wasn't working for me earlier on. And then I'm just going to plug these in and then plug this into the UVs here, because we want to control this separately. And then I'm just going to stretch the comment over so that it's there. And now this is kind of ready to go. Now the only thing I want to do is just to add these into their own groups. So I'm going to create a group called color, and then I'm going to add that to color. I'm going to create a group called emissive, add that to emissive. I'm going to add this to, it's going to be called roughness. This is going to be called tile. This group's going to be PSM, and then this is all going to be called normal, and these are going to be added to that group, and you'll see in a minute why I've done that. Oh, that as well, that needs to go into the normal. Click apply and save. Now if we now right click and go, actually just give me 2 seconds because there's a slight issue that while I was demoing this, I've put the density default value to 5. We don't want that. Click apply. Now what I'm going to do is right click on here and go create material instance. I'm going to call this wall. Actually, I'm going to rename this to tiles so we can see this. And then what we've got there is we've got this material instance now. So what we can do is we can change this. So if I type in tiles, and then if I change the normal map to tiles as well. And if I change the PSM to the tiles PSM, and then I can change the tiling of this to say 5. Oh, and there we go. And you can play around with all this information. So if I look at the roughness, I can play around with this and say 0.6, or I can be more, say 0.4. Yeah. So I can play around with all these, and it doesn't affect the original material. So that's why it's really good to use this, and I highly recommend setting this up. You could use this material for props as well. It doesn't need to be tileable materials. It could be props. It would just be different. But thank you.
Hi, Jules.